All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. As we close out April, we are also saying goodbye to Informed Women's Month. And to that end, Visa has informed me that my bill is due tomorrow. Thanks, Visa. And good luck with that. Today is also International Dance Day, and you know what that means. Turn on Michael Jackson's Thriller video and do the group Monster Dance if you remember it. But today is also World Wish Day, and I wish the world were different. But I'd like to think that with this series, we are indeed making a difference. And so, welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. As you know, this is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical thinking. My name is Leanne Lord, and I am delighted to be your host. I am a stand up comedian and author, and I'm also a co host for the Point of Inquiry podcast. If you are so inclined, you can find out more about me and my work at veryfunnylady.com. Now, before we get going, I have a few reminders. The Center for Inquiry's Coronavirus Resource Center continues curating reliable news at centerforinquiry.org/coronavirus. And they shared a piece from Nature about Brazil's researchers who are blaming anti-science government for the devastating COVID surge. And there's also a piece from PolitiFact that says, no, you do not need to avoid getting pregnant after getting a COVID-19 vaccine. There are, of course, many reasons to avoid getting pregnant. Again, the vaccine is not one of them. Word to the wise. And as always, I invite you to subscribe to Skeptical Inquirer magazine. There are two ways to do that, digital and print. And bonus, I love this part. This is the best part. The print subscription also gives you access to the digital version. You can get either or both at skepticalinquirer.org. And by all means, please do mark your calendar for our next Skeptical Inquirer Presents, which is on Thursday, May 13th. Nina Burley will be joining us to talk about vaccinations, the CDC, and the hijacking of America's response to the pandemic. Now, if you are new here with us, here's the deal. The flow of the evening is easy breezy. You just keep doing what you're doing. I'll introduce our guest. They'll razzle and dazzle, after which we will open it up for your questions. And at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's an icon that says Q&A, and that's the place for you to type your questions in the form of a question, if you will. And if you miss any of the talk tonight, it is being recorded and it will be available on skepticalinquirer.org. And so now, off we go. Our guest is, I love this part, a retired video game programmer. That is so awesome. He is a writer, investigator, and debunker who enjoys looking into the evidence behind conspiracy theories and strange phenomena, and then explaining what is actually going on. He runs the Metabunk forum at metabunk.org, which is dedicated to the art and pastime of honest, polite, scientific investigating and debunking. He is also the author of the book Escaping the Rabbit Hole. I mean, how do you get through to someone who rejects conflicting evidence and thinks that you're part of the problem? So, here to talk about how to help your conspiracy theorist friend, please welcome Mick West. Mick, thank you.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Thank you for that great introduction. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to be part of this great series of talks. Let me just get my screen going here. Okay. And maybe 1 second. All right. So, escaping the rabbit hole. What pragmatic things can be done to help individuals escape the conspiracy theory rabbit hole? The problem is something that we're all familiar with, I think. You probably know someone who believes in some kind of conspiracy theory, and you want to know how to talk to them and how to get through to them. And a lot of the times, this can be a very difficult, confusing matter because these people don't seem like they respond to reason. And it can be very frustrating if you're used to having a reasonable conversation with somebody and all of a sudden they start like not listening to you. It can seem hopeless because nothing seems to work. And the beliefs that they're proposing are often quite ridiculous beliefs, like some of the beliefs to do with QAnon or some of the other conspiracy theories are very outlandish, and it's very difficult to wrap your head around. So it's very, very difficult to understand how to talk to them. They don't seem to respond to new evidence. This is a big problem. You tell somebody something that you think should explain things to people, and they don't get it. They're just kind of ignore what you just said. And it often means that the conversations that you have with these people, your friends or relatives sometimes, devolve into arguments, which can be a very big issue, because when something becomes an argument, it's no longer a conversation that's really going to be very productive. Often you will have the experience of you feel like you've made a bit of progress with somebody, and then the next day it seems like they've doubled down, and it almost seems like what you've discussed with them made it worse. You get a one step forward, two step back type of thing. But there are reasons to be hopeful, and I wanted to start with this list of reasons, because I know people are kind of in some ways seeking hope. So my number one reason to be hopeful in this situation is that people do get out. And I've met a lot of these people. I have helped a lot of these people get out of the rabbit hole, and they do escape the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. There are techniques that are helpful. There are things that you can do that will actually have an effect. The progress is often invisible and cumulative. Now, this might seem like it's not a very helpful thing, but once you realize that the progress is invisible, it can, I think, help you be more hopeful about what you're actually doing, because something else I have learned is that it takes a long time, which again doesn't sound like a very hopeful thing, because you don't want things to take a long time. You want you want immediate results. But if you know something is going to take a long time, then it will help you not get frustrated, and it will help you strategize in the way you approach your friend. Now, in the meantime, life goes on. You know, your relationships with people does not need to end just because you have what seems like an irreconcilable difference. You can actually get to a understanding with people, which isn't necessarily meaning that you've converted them or you agree with them, or that things have changed. But life goes on, and this is something that I've seen time and time again. People start out being surprised and horrified that a relative or a friend has these strange ideas, but over time they come to deal with it, and over a longer period of time they end up helping the person out. So don't assume all is lost. Now, a quick background. Leanne gave a little background for me, but my background with conspiracy debunking, as she said, I'm a former video game programmer. I helped make the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series of video games. I've been writing about the Chemtrails conspiracy theory since 2006, and this is the theory that the government is secretly spraying us from planes. And I then started the Metabunk forum to discuss various other conspiracy theories in 2011, 10 years ago now. And we talk about things like the 9/11 conspiracy theory, false flag shooting, like people think that Sandy Hook was false, was a staged event, things like flat Earth and UFOs, even, because some people do believe in these things, and so we need to talk about them. And more recent things like election fraud conspiracies, climate change skepticism, which isn't really that recent, and anti-vaccine conspiracy theories, which are actually very, very old indeed, but much more in the forefront now. And I've talked to hundreds of current and former conspiracy theorists, and some of them are still conspiracy theorists, some of them are not. And both types of theorist is instructive, I think. I wrote a book called Escaping the Rabbit Hole, and during the course of writing this book, I interviewed a whole bunch of different conspiracy theorists. Some of whom I gave their accounts in the book, some of them just provided background. I asked them what got them in. What was it like whilst they were in there, and how did they get out of the conspiracy theory? And then, taking all this information I got from people, I tried to formulate best practices to help people escape the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. And this was basically just my experience helping people and what other people told me actually worked, the people who actually got out, what actually worked for them, and to a certain degree, the people who didn't get out, what didn't work for them. So from all of this, I developed a three-part process. I say 3 parts, it's really kind of a 3-aspect process, and really it's only 2 parts really when you look into it. The first part is maintain effective communication. Now, this is super important. Maintaining effective communication is the foundation of everything I do. And really it boils down to talking to people, keeping a conversation going that can be productive, keeping a framework of conversation going so you can actually have a conversation and so you can actually talk to them about these things at some point. Stage 2, or aspect 2, is supplying useful information. And this, I think, is something that people often jumped into as step 1. They think, oh, this person is wrong, so what I'm going to do is supply them with some useful information that helps them show that they are wrong. And so I'll send them a link to Snopes, or I'll send them this article from PolitiFact, or I'll send them this thing from the New York Times that proves that they are wrong. This doesn't work, because if you haven't already established some kind of framework in which they trust you and they trust what you are trying to do in the conversation, then simply supplying them with useful information isn't going to work. You need to have this framework of effective communication, which I'll talk about more in a second. And then step 3 is to give it time, which isn't really a step, it's just kind of an overarching thing. It takes a long time to do these things, and you need to realize that you're not going to get immediate results. There's no silver bullet. You can't just shoot someone with a truth bullet and have them come out no longer believing a conspiracy theory. So you've got to give it time, and you've got to realize that it's going to take time. So let's kind of break that down a little bit. Excuse me. So the first thing, maintaining effective communication. This is really kind of predicated upon you trying to understand the other person, trying to understand what they believe and why they believe it. Now, this can be sometimes kind of a difficult thing for people to do, because it seems like the other person is saying something that's so ridiculously outlandish that you don't want to even kind of entertain what they are talking about. But if you want to have a communication with someone, if you want to have a conversation with someone, you need to understand what they believe, and more importantly, why they believe it. And you have to do this in a way that is respectful, honest, open, and polite. This, again, is something that people have trouble with. And people would ask, why should I respect this other person's beliefs? These ridiculous ideas that this person has, there's no reason why I should even give them the time of day. But this other person, they're a person too, and they probably have a similar opinion of you. They think that your beliefs are ridiculous, and one of you is wrong, and it's probably going to be the other person. But they essentially are coming at it from a position of good faith. They think they are correct, and they think they are doing good. So you have to respect that. You have to respect that they think they are doing what is the right thing. Now, it may be that they are wrong in their thinking, but they're trying to do the right thing. So you don't have to agree with them, but respect where they're coming from, and be honest about it as well. Don't pretend to like their ideas. Don't pretend to agree with them. Be honest and say that you disagree with them. And be completely open about what you feel about it and how it makes you feel. But be polite about it. Don't shout at them and call them stupid. Just tell them, this sounds ridiculous to me. This sounds like it's impossible. Let's talk about that. Do it politely. Finding common ground. It seems like a fairly obvious thing, but a lot of the times people start out from a position that's adversarial. And if you start out from something that's adversarial, you're arguing in the air. You're not really basing your conversation on a foundation. So if you find yourself not progressing in a conversation with someone as a conspiracy theorist, try to bring it down to something that you can agree upon. It could be just, you're talking about sports or politics or something like that, something where you can actually have some kind of agreement, or perhaps you can find some common ground in their actual concerns. A lot of people who are conspiracy theorists have beliefs that are somewhat founded in genuine concerns, like health concerns, for example. People who believe that the government is spraying things from planes might be concerned about pollution. And this is something that you and I can also be concerned about. I am concerned about the pollution that comes out of the back of airplanes. I'm concerned about all kinds of different pollution. So we can find common ground about a topic that's related. That's really one of their concerns. You drill down, see what the actual concern is, and see what you share. If they're concerned about the government getting into people's lives in a certain way, maybe they think that they're injecting microchips into them, you might be concerned with things like facial recognition being used to track people's motions. These are privacy concerns that you actually share. So there are things you share, and you can find common ground, and you can talk about them. You want to avoid the backfire effect, which means that you want to avoid doing things that make things worse. It's really kind of more like the blowback effect. What happens sometimes is if you give people a whole bunch of evidence, they can actually take your efforts as being some kind of evidence that the theory is true, because why else would you be spending so much time doing this? And if you start piling on lots of things from various sources, then this can make them kind of react badly. So be careful when you're talking to people to observe how they're reacting to things. It doesn't mean you're trying to brainwash them. It's just you don't want the conversation to go south. You want to have a productive conversation with people. You want to avoid any kind of blowback from the conversation. In the next stage, once you've established this effective conversation, which is the most important thing, is to supply useful information. And this is kind of like the traditional fact checking type of thing that you might be used to as a skeptic. Seeing is the claims of evidence correct? So you look at things like mistakes they have made. Have they made some particular claim that for a fact is false? Like they might be saying, like, for example, there's lead in vaccines or something like that, which to be false, and you can show them that it's false. There's mistakes that other people have made. Now, this is an interesting one from a skeptical point of view, because skeptics are taught that you should attack the argument and not the man. You shouldn't attack the ad hominem, the man or the woman, ad hom though. And so we kind of shy away from doing things like trying to discredit the source. But the problem here is that when people believe in conspiracy theories, they have a very limited number of sources. And they believe these sources because they think that these sources have some kind of authority or some kind of track record of being correct all the time. And it can be very, very productive to show them that this person has, in fact, made mistakes in the past. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to start doing straight on ad hom, this guy, Alex Jones, is an idiot. But you can say, here's something Alex Jones said in the past, and here's the reality. Here's something Andrew Wakefield said in the past, or here's a paper Andrew Wakefield said in the past. Here is what the actual reality is. And then you kind of lead them to the realization that the sources that they are relying upon are not as reliable as they thought it was. Things that they might have missed. People sometimes, often with conspiracy theories, it's quite surprising what they don't know. With the 9/11 conspiracy theory, I talked to a guy the other day who did not realize that there was a detailed technical report on the collapses of the Twin Towers carried out by NIST. And I thought everybody knew this, but often people don't actually look for this information. So talk to the person, and things will crop up where you'll see, they're not aware of this thing, and then you can help them. You can tell them about it. People might not be aware that persistent contrails have been described in weather books since the 1940s. And they believe in this chemtrail conspiracy theory, but if you look in these old weather books, it shows the same thing. So you can show them things that they have missed. It isn't necessarily a mistake that they've made. So you're not really debunking. You're supplying them with new information that it will help invalidate other mistakes that they have made, but it's stuff they've missed. And then on top of that, there's giving them a broader perspective. A lot of people, like I said, have a kind of a crippled list of information sources that they use. And if you can give them a bit more perspective about, say, the way the world works, it might help them have a better perspective on how their conspiracy theory might or might not work. Like, some people think that there's a very small number of people, like this little cabal of Jewish bankers who run the world. And what you can do is you can go to the Forbes billionaire list with your friend, and show them this list of people and go through it and look at all the different people who are on this list of billionaires. And this can be really, I think, a bit of an eye-opener, because people don't realize just how many rich people there are and how many powerful people there are and how the world really works. Another thing you can talk about is how politics works, how politicians get things done, how laws come into effect, how a bill is made, things like that. People don't understand how the sausage is made, so they have this very amorphous idea about what's going on. You can tell them other things, like say with anti-vax, you can talk about the history of vaccinations, what happened with smallpox and polio. These are things that they simply might not be aware of. You might assume that they're aware of it because you're aware of it, and you think that this is kind of common knowledge, that people know the eradication of smallpox and the invention of the polio vaccine. But it's quite possible that your friend who's an anti-vaxxer just simply doesn't know anything at all about the history of vaccinations. All of this has to be in the context of maintaining effective communication. So you have to be constantly aware whilst you're doing this. How do I don't mess it up? How do I move forward with this thing? And how do I make sure I'm not backfiring? And how does this fit into the overall picture of things? And give it time. The biggest mistake you can make is expecting immediate results. So you will often have zero apparent effect with your things, but it is actually working. You're moving people towards a moment of clarity, and things you tell them do actually help. So it's very easy to get frustrated and think that you're not having an effect, but you are actually having an effect. So don't give up. Now, let's delve a little bit more into understanding people. To understand a person, a vital part of maintaining effective communication with someone is to understand them. And to really understand somebody, you have to understand how they got to where they were. So you have to understand kind of their trajectory through the conspiracy space. And I've been interviewed a lot of people for my book, and since then I've kind of hit upon kind of a trajectory, I think, that is fairly common amongst people. It kind of starts with an origin story. If you ask people how they got into a conspiracy theory, they will almost invariably tell you, I watched a video. Nowadays, this is almost always how they got into it. Sometimes it's talking to a friend, and sometimes it's reading a book, but it's almost always now they watched a video. And if you understand what that video was and you go and watch it yourself, that can help you understand where they're coming from. The next stage, after they've watched this video and they're being convinced by this video that there's something up, is the kind of the doing their own research stage, the fun and game stage, where they're learning about all kinds of new things, and it's this great feeling because they discovered this new truth about the world and everything's changing and there's new things going on. And then they kind of start to withdraw from the world. They start cutting off their information sources. They realize that the mainstream news is all lies, and so they don't listen to that, and they start cutting off their friends, even if their friends start disagreeing with them. They become more isolated socially and intellectually. Eventually, things kind of plateau. They get to a stage where they've established a set of beliefs, and they still work within that, but they're not necessarily learning new things all the time. This is very much the case with the older conspiracy theories. Then, hopefully, and with the people who get out, they all tell me that at some point they have some kind of moment of clarity. They either realize they were wrong about one thing, or they realize that something that someone told them was wrong, that someone is telling them something that they already know to be wrong. For example, Alex Jones might say that nobody died at Sandy Hook, when they might know, for example, that people died at Sandy Hook. And they have this moment of realization. And the moment of realization essentially gives them permission to start asking questions. And with that becomes an unraveling and a more honest examination of the conspiracy theory, and it reveals more falsehoods. And that is, essentially kind of begins this journey out of the rabbit hole. And this is often very much a self-directed thing. What you don't do is drag someone kicking and screaming out of the rabbit hole. What we're trying to do is bring them up to a stage where they can help themselves get out of that rabbit hole. Okay. Now, people go through this conspiracy trajectory in very similar ways, but conspiracy theories are all different. And it's very important to realize where somebody is in the conspiracy world, because a lot of people you kind of say, oh, they're a conspiracy theorist and they believe this and this. But conspiracy theorists are all different. They all have their own favorite conspiracy theory, and within that favorite conspiracy theory, they have a limit. They have a limit beyond which they don't actually believe certain things. And I have this conspiracy theory extremeness spectrum, where I down at zero is fairly banal things like big pharma covering up their test results. In the middle, there are things like chemtrails and 9/11. And towards the end, there are things like flat earth, ridiculous conspiracy theories. And people will essentially draw a line somewhere along this spectrum. On one side of the line, I call this the line of demarcation, they have what they think of as being sensible theories, things that they know would be grounded in fact. Like they know, for example, that 9/11 was an inside job, JFK was killed by the CIA, big pharma covers things up, things like that. And on the other side, there are things that are more extreme that they don't believe in, that they don't believe that the Earth is flat, they don't believe the Queen is a reptile, they don't believe that the moon landing is fake. And for everybody, this line varies. And working around this line is a very, very important technique that I use, and I think other people should use when they talk to conspiracy theorists. Because if you try to do something that's too far to one side or the other, it's not going to have any effect. If they don't believe it, it doesn't really matter if you debunk it. And if it's something that they believe to be God's honest truth, you're not going to have any effect. So you've got to focus around the line. Look at things that you can actually change in their belief structure. And the only way you can learn that is by talking to them. A good example is 9/11. It's a classic conspiracy theory. It's a complex but largely static mythology, meaning it's a whole bunch of stories that people tell, a bunch of evidence that they claim, but it hasn't really changed very much in the last 10 years. It spans the entire spectrum because we have like let it happen theories where people, where Bush let it happen, all the way down to laser beams from space blowing up the towers and holograms. I kind of give them this little numbers here saying where they lay on the spectrum. Who financed bin Laden is 1 or 2. Whether exploded under building 5 or 6. Did a plane hit the Pentagon 7? Were there even planes at all? Some people do not think there were planes. It's 8. But what's important here is that you try to figure out where your friend lies on this conspiracy spectrum. Because if you start debunking the wrong thing, it's going to be completely useless. If you start even talking about the wrong thing, it's not going to help. Figure out what's the most extreme thing that they believe and start focusing on that. So you find a line, you work around it. With 9/11, some people think the plane hit the Pentagon, some people don't. They will show you evidence like this. They will show this hole is too small. A 757 is much bigger than this. The hole's only 22 feet. You can find the contrary evidence. You can usually just Google it. Plane hitting Pentagon debunked. You can look it up. You will see things like this. This is evidence of the shape of the plane, a wing hitting the wall of the Pentagon. You can find this evidence. You can show it to them. Things like this can shift their line a little bit. And what you're trying to do isn't, again, drag them out kicking and screaming, is to kind of give them a framework that they can get themselves out. And moving their line gives them permission to question a little bit more. Chemtrails. Another thing you need to understand, besides the people, is the theorists themselves. Chemtrails is a fairly complicated conspiracy theory. What are chemtrails? Well, what are contrails? A contrail is a cloud formed by condensing water in jet exhaust. You see them behind planes. It's just the condensation behind a plane. A chemtrail is a toxic trail left by a secret large-scale aerial spraying program. The idea is the government is secretly spraying stuff on us, and it kind of looks like contrails. Is confused by the fact that there's 2 types of contrails, aerodynamic contrails and exhaust contrails. Now, things start to get complicated. You start looking into these conspiracy theories, and often you start getting lost. You're not going to be able to understand all these things. Some of you are scientists, some of you are not. So you're not always going to be able to understand these things. But as much as you can, it's good to be familiar with the types of arguments they're talking about. Like, for example, the different types of engines that planes have, and that they might say, oh, high bypass jet engines don't make contrails. This is a claim that is made. You can Google the actual answer to this, look it up, and try to figure out how to tell the person that this actually do if you can manage to have a conversation about it, they will tell you that there are chemical tests, and these tests, again, there are things you can Google. You can look at where the actual answer is. And if this is something that's right on the edge of the belief of this person, then having a conversation to them about this, if you're comfortable, can be very, very productive. So you find the line. So, with chemtrails, like a good example that came up in my research was this photo here. This is a photo of barrels on a plane, and it looks suspicious. It looks like a plane full of chemicals. What else could it be other than a spraying chemical plane? And it actually says hazmat detected, hazmat inside on that little sign in the background by the restroom there. So this was actually something that came up because one of the guys in my book that I interviewed said that chemtrail barrels, this photo, was the smoking gun for him. In support of chemtrails, it was the barrel thing. He saw it and it was like, oh, well, that proves it. So he saw this photo and he thought, that proves it. And that one thing took him down the rabbit hole. And he was devastated, but he believed it and he carried on believing it. So, this is a complicated thing, but we can look into it though. Yeah, you can, they're unusual, intimidating, and complicated. You don't know what's going on at first, but you can Google it. You can type in something like chemtrail barrels explained or chemtrail barrels debunked, and things will come up. You will discover that these are in fact just ballast barrels used in test aircraft. Before a plane is certified, they test it by putting barrels of water in it, and they have tubes so they can shift things around to simulate different configurations of passengers. You can't just tell them this, though. You have to show them actual evidence that this is the true. You can't just send them to NASA's website either because they don't trust NASA. You need to somehow shine a spotlight on this issue and a detailed debunk. So the first thing is to find the original photograph. You can show that this photograph was faked. The original is on airliners.net and it doesn't have the little hazmat thing on the restroom here. It's just a photograph, and the description of the photograph tells you what it is. There are lots and lots and lots of other photographs of these ballast barrels, and they all have descriptions. So you can share these with your friend in a neutral way. Lots and lots of them. There are even really old books. I think this is from the 1960s, maybe even the 1950s, showing the very earliest, the 737 being tested. Actually, it's probably a 747. But there are old things, and the more you can give people, the better. There's lots of these old books that give these details now. And if this is a pivot issue for the person, then it can be very valuable to spend your time investigating this and sharing this with the person in the framework of a constructive conversation. One thing you need to be careful about here is using online collections. I have a site, Metabunk, and Metabunk, of course, is a debunking website. So people are suspicious of it. So if you send them a link to this page of Metabunk debunks, they're going to say, oh, that's just Metabunk. So what you want to do is send them the originals if you can. Send them a scan from the book. And if you really want to get deep into it, something I've done is actually find the original book that has this stuff in and give them a copy of that book. That works very well. And it worked for Willie. He said, like, one day somebody debunked the ballast barrel thing. When they gave me the information, I thought, oh my God, the other thinking was wrong. And he realized that someone had been lying to him about these ballast barrels. It was this kind of eureka moment for him. And it was something that started him out on his journey out of the rabbit hole. Once he saw that this one thing he believed was wrong, it gave him permission to examine other things, and all these other beliefs just fell away. Because once you start examining things with a critical mind, and this is the thing you want to get people to do, things fall away. What if it doesn't seem to work, though? Of course, you're talking to your friend and nothing happens. You tell them all this stuff, you show them these pictures, you show them these QAnon debunks. Don't give up, first of all. It takes a lot of time, so don't just stop because you're not getting results. Don't get angry or incredulous and start saying, how on earth can you not believe this? That might be your reaction, but it's not really going to help. You want to try to remain calm, keep a friendly conversation going. You have supplied them with useful information. Keep that in mind. Keep in mind that, even though it doesn't seem like you're helping, you are actually helping. And, it's providing a framework for conversations. You tell them this one day, they'll take it in, they'll disagree with it, but you can come back to it later and you can talk about it. QAnon, which I know a lot of people are interested in, is a bit different from these older conspiracy theories. QAnon is a highly dynamic, full spectrum, resilient theory. What do I mean by that? Highly dynamic means that it's changing all the time. The whole thing about QAnon is that there are these drops from a person who calls himself Q, and there's new ones all the time, especially in the heyday of the conspiracy theory. There were new things coming along every day. People actually got essentially addicted to seeing what the new Q thing was and then reading it and incorporating it into their lives. So this makes it very difficult because they never get to a stage, they never get to a plateau. They're always stuck in the fun and game stage. They're doing their own research. They're having fun. It's like a game. So it's difficult to get them past that. So, debunking the claims that come up in real time isn't really that useful because there's always something new coming along. And it's just part of the game for them to try to figure out how to get around this debunk of whatever this new thing is. So what's better is to focus on the older beliefs. Look at the historical claims from QAnon and try to supply broader information about the world so that they can see these things in context. But really what you want to do is find things that this person has believed for a long time that you can actually address. Because if it's something that's just the flavor of the week, they're going to let it go. If it's something that they've believed for years or a year or many months, however long it is, it's going to be a lot harder for them to let it go. And it's a much more effective thing to focus on their older beliefs. Another thing you can do, just in general with all conspiracy theories, is try to guide them towards the experiences of former believers. There's a lot of articles online where people have interviewed former QAnon believers. And if you can talk to your friend about this can be a very valuable way of proceeding. Excuse me. Now, QAnon is in many ways more like a cult than a conspiracy theory. And one thing you might find valuable is looking at the work of people who focus on cults. Stephen Hassan is one guy who has several books. He has a book on the cult of Trump, which is more about Trump believers, but it's the hardcore Trump believers, not just regular ones, who might believe in the QAnon conspiracy theory. And he has older books as well. And there's lots of other books on cults. So, if you want to broaden your reading on this topic, look into cults, especially if you're dealing with someone who believes in QAnon. So again, find the line, work around it. QAnon has lots of stuff near the line because it's a constant stream of stuff coming in, and it's constantly changing. So you don't want to address new stuff. So you want to look at these older proofs. Ideally, if you can, try to find something that's part of their origin story. And this is something it's best if you get them to tell you their origin story. Ask them, why did you start believing in this? They'll tell you various proofs that they saw. And then you can start talking about them. Example is the tip-top proof. This is a fairly well-known thing in QAnon. Somebody asked Q if Donald Trump could work the phrase tip-top into the State of the Union address. And in fact, Trump did use the phrase tip-top. He didn't use it in the State of the Union address, which was the next day. He used it like 3 months later on an Easter address. But he did use it, and this convinced a lot of people because you simply put this claim. Someone asked Trump to use tip top. Later, he used the phrase. It seems quite convincing that it actually worked, and it worked for this guy here, Siddharth Jayadea, and he was the guy who was originally a Bernie Sanders supporter. He became a Trump supporter. He got sucked into Alex Jones and then QAnon. By 2016, he was a full-on Q believer, and then he spiraled downwards for 2 years. The typical trajectory. He lost friends. His studies suffered. In 2019, though, he started to have doubts. There was doubts about why is Trump being so mean to Julian Assange? That kind of made him a little bit suspicious. But there was this one thing that he was still holding on to, which is this tip-top belief that really was a foundational belief for him, and so he started to look into tip-top. And now in 2020, he's a full-on anti-QAnon activist. He's coming completely out of the rabbit hole. What happened for him was that he looked into it. He saw on YouTube there was a debunking video that showed that Trump actually used the phrase tip-top all the time. In fact, he's been using it like every few months for the last, ever since he became president, and since before then, he would always talk about how his properties were in tip-top condition. And so this is something that actually worked for him. Debunking actually worked, partly because he was in a position that he was open to it. The debunking worked because he's already started to waver. People had showed him these things. They'd raised these issues with him, like, if Trump is Q, why is he trying to extradite and punish Julian Assange when Julian Assange is kind of on our side in terms of freedom fighting? So he had these conflicting beliefs, and this made him open to this one thing. It was a turning point for him, and I think it's very important that we look at how people got out of the rabbit hole and apply that to how people might get out of the rabbit hole. And this type of journey, this trajectory through the rabbit hole, is something that's happened all the time with people. And what we're trying to do is guide people through that trajectory and help accelerate their journey through that trajectory. Even if it's something like QAnon, which seems like they can't get through it, you can actually help them get through faster. Sometimes you can help them out very, very fast. And once they start to come out, you can help provide them with resources that will accelerate their exit. Now, I just want to talk very briefly about skepticism. Now, this is the Skeptical Inquirer Presents talk, so a lot of people here will read Skeptical Inquirer. I read Skeptical Inquirer myself. I've got my name inside it. And there's a little issue I found with the skeptical community and people within the skeptic community, is that it might not seem like an issue, but most skeptics enjoy figuring out the truth. They enjoy exposing charlatans. They enjoy promoting science, and they often enjoy complaining about pseudoscience and bemoaning the lack of education and critical thinking in this country. And this is something I do myself, of course. But this isn't always very productive. This is something that might not work well when you're talking to your friend who is a conspiracy theorist. And you sometimes, when you're talking to a conspiracy theorist, if you are a skeptic who is used to talking to other skeptics and is used to discussing conspiracy theories in a very rational way with other skeptics who all agree with you and they all know what's going on, you might need to curb your natural tendencies towards ridiculing people and belittling people and then telling them that they don't have much education. This is something I think that you might not realize you're doing it. I didn't myself when I started out doing these things. You think it's very straightforward and sensible to tell people that their ideas are ridiculous and that they need more education and that they should apply more critical thinking. But it's not helping. It's not helping. You need to curb that idea and think about what's actually going to work. You might not like it, but if you want to help someone, you've got to be pragmatic about it. It doesn't matter if your blood might boil when you're being respectful to people, but if you want to help them, being respectful is the best way to do it. And some of you might remember Phil Plait did a talk on TAM 8 titled Don't Be a Dick. I recommend, if you're interested in that particular aspect of it, go back and watch that. It's something that made some people angry at the time and some people responded well to it. But it's an important talk and it's an important topic, I think, within the skeptic community. In summary, there is hope. People get out, even the worst cases. Maintain effective communication. Keep talking to people. Respect them. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Try to understand them. Try to get them to understand you. Start with common ground so you can actually have a basis for your conversation, and work on claims of evidence around the line of demarcation in their line of conspiracy theory. And remember that every little helps. Every little you can do actually helps. So keep going. And give it time. Don't get frustrated. Keep talking to them, because experience has shown that even though it seems hopeless, people can escape from the rabbit hole. And that's it. Thank you.
Mick, thank you so much. Oop, I'm having trouble turning my camera back on. I'm going to develop a conspiracy theory around that. I'm not. I'm totally not. Thank you so much for that. We have a ton of questions for you. I will say some of these takeaways. I'm not a chemtrail person. I think I'm in that tiny sliver of that generational sliver where when I see that stuff coming out of the back of airplanes, I'm thinking Sesame Street and alphabet baits, and they're going to make alphabet words in the sky. So I am
Yeah.
clearly showing my age right there, but that's for me a better way of looking at it. And yes, curb your enthusiasm. Nobody likes this for some strange reason. Nobody likes having a fingers shaking in their face telling them that they're an idiot. How has that not been working, everybody? Shocking. Shocking that that doesn't work. But a lot of the things you've listed requires a lot of restraint. A lot of restraint, a lot of
Yes.
compassion. But there are folks who are asking questions better than I. Someone who shares my name, Leanne Abbott. Hello, Leanne. Our parents were on the same wavelength, apparently. Um, she says, "Hi, Mick. Loving your book so far and excited for this evening. Um, my friends dedicated to conspiracy theories don't trust any
Mhm.
established information outlets, and that is a theme running through all these questions. They'll only trust firsthand experience, which sometimes boils down to TikTok and Instagram videos." One of them even said to her that PBS was too liberal and was letting herself get brainwashed. How do we establish the credibility of sources that you're using?
Yeah, you probably don't establish the credibility of sources because they view official sources as being corrupt. So you kind of have to look outside of that framework wherever possible. There are a lot of people who do things on YouTube that aren't official sources. They're just people who are making videos about things. So you can find people who are good at explaining things, but they're not part of CNN and they're not part of whatever it is. You can also look at older sources, depending on what particular theory we're talking about. For example, with the chemtrails conspiracy theory, it's good to look at old books because they describe contrails acting in a way that people now say are chemtrails. So unless people are going to say this theory has gone back 40 years, then that's something that they can't deny. And with other things like vaccines, it's useful to have historical context. And some people obviously are going to say that all of history is faked as well. But most people will actually respond to seeing older accounts, which are 40 years old or so, or even longer. So try to look for information sources that are not official and ways of getting it across that don't involve relying upon an official thing. But if you've got something like say Snopes, they're not going to trust Snopes. But what you can do is go into the Snopes article and look at the various sources that are in there and try to just pick the ones that are the most neutral from within that or from whatever the article source is. If it's a Wikipedia thing, there's going to be things that they won't look at. So toss those away and look at the ones that they might look at. So pick your sources carefully.
This sounds the parallel of this sounds like something I remember from school. Show your work. Not just good to do the top level, but really dig down and do the get into your sources. Um, I'm thinking you gotta love somebody to really do this work. Um, Brad said that you didn't mention it in your book, but do you think that organized religion is the biggest, deepest, weirdest rabbit hole of all time?
Well, in a way, yes, but in a way, no, because organized religion is kind of predicated upon superstition and magic, you might say. The idea that there is a magical being of whatever type it is, depending on the religion. And there's also this big organization that promotes this theory. But it's also something that has been part of human society for thousands of years, essentially. And it's something that we've all managed to work with. And we kind of know what the issues are. So it's kind of like a stable issue in society. I understand the people who are atheists. I'm an atheist myself, but the more active atheists who think that it's like a big problem in society to a certain degree, like certain aspects of it are. But it's also something that we've lived with for a very long time, and there are lots of fairly secular countries where there are people who go to church, and it's not really a big issue. So yes, it is kind of, when you think about it, it's kind of a weird thing that's whatever these magical religions are. But when you see what's actually going on, it's not that weird.
Okay. Lori Ogborn. And Lori, I think you have a common problem. She says that my brother loves to send me articles to prove his conspiracies. Sometimes I ignore them, which makes me worry that he thinks I agree, and sometimes I rebut, which just brings out more of his evidence. What should I do?
That is a tricky one. I think what you want to do really is try to talk to him rather than just have a kind of a back and forth of giving evidence. Try to have some of the conversations that I kind of talked about in the talk, and I talk about in my book. Why do they believe certain things? How do they come to believe a certain thing? Oh, if someone sends you an article, talk to them about that article, and whether they think that it makes good points. Because a lot of these articles, when you dive into them and you try to examine them, they don't make good points. But if you point this out to the other person, it doesn't always work. So if you can somehow use a more Socratic approach where you're discussing it with them, get them to examine the article, get them to try to present a good case based on this article, you can kind of turn it around a little bit. It's definitely a tricky thing though, and it's like I say, it's one of those things that you will get frustrated. It's one step forward, two steps back, and it'll seem like you're not making progress, but you probably are. Even though these rebuttals might seem like they're not working, you're still supplying him with useful information. Maybe you can try to find a better way of doing it, more productive way, but you're still helping.
Colin asked an interesting question, and I'm going to paraphrase here, Colin, and ask it this way: Mick, have you ever been wrong about a conspiracy theory?
Well, I'm often wrong on the details of things, but
Okay.
people, I often my first hypothesis on various things is often incorrect because I'm a little bit hasty sometimes, I think, when I come to figuring things out. But being wrong about whether something actually happened or not, I don't think I have. I mean, the thing is, I tend to focus on topics that are fairly fringe, which naturally lends my axe to examining things which are probably wrong from the start. Like obviously the flat Earth thing, but a lot of the 9/11 conspiracy theorists are pretty extreme. Even the chemtrail thing is pretty extreme. QAnon is pretty extreme. So the things I look at tend not to be things that I get wrong. Now, if I start getting into things that are a bit more, a little bit closer to one end of the spectrum, like water fluoridation and even vaccine safety and things like that, I will make mistakes in the science because it's a complicated thing. I don't know. I wouldn't say I was wrong about the entire conspiracy theory, though.
Wow, look at you admitting to humanity. That's awesome. The Vulcan in me totally rebels against that. Star Trek fans don't at me. I know Spock was honest above all else. Let's see. Oh, Dan, thank you, Dan, for asking this question. I had that too. Dan wants to know, is the backfire effect real? Because recent studies say that it's not real. Like attacking them won't win them to your side, but won't harden their beliefs either. I'm torn on that.
Well, you've got to look at what we're talking about here. The backfire effect is kind of an academic thing, and it's been studied in an academic context. And what we're dealing with is the practical realities of the real world. And so when the researchers first looked at the backfire effect, they did these fairly simple tests where they had a particular narrow domain of knowledge. I can't remember what it was they were talking about. And then they supplied contrary knowledge, and then they measured people's results on a questionnaire like a few days later. And then some other researchers later did a similar series of tests, and they didn't find the same results as the first test, which showed that it probably wasn't there. But these tests, like I say, they're academic tests. They're not really large-scale, real-world tests where people have tried to do a particular way of approaching conspiracy theories. So I think everybody can anecdotally say that the backfire effect is real, because we've all had experiences where we tell somebody something and it makes things worse. This is something I think that has happened to most people. But I think we've also had experiences where we tell people something and it makes things better. So what we've got to try to figure out is, how do we get to the second one? How do we just do the things that make things better? And I think a lot of it has to do with how you have the conversation with the person, how you get this effective communication framework working. And if you get that working, less backfire effect.
Well done. Well done. Vivian had a question, and it's about what emotional needs might be met by embracing a conspiracy theory. And just for a quick note, Vivian, if you get a chance, if you did not see, if you go back to the Skeptical Inquirer Presents that we did with Stephanie Kemmerer, where she talked about QAnon and actually being one of those people that got out of the rabbit hole, she does a great job talking about what that is. But I would love to hear your thoughts as well, Mick.
Yeah, it's hard to say because it varies a lot by individual. There are academic studies, and they find correlations with things like a need for a uniqueness, and this is something that you can test people for. What is their degree of people wanting to feel special? And people who want to feel special more tend to be more likely to be conspiracy theorists. But that's something that's a small percentage on average over a large number of people. So for an individual person, it might not be something that really relates. And there's other things, like some people like to have a sense that they are in control. Some people feel like they are powerless when they don't understand world events, and they feel by understanding things, like if they discover the conspiracy theory, all of a sudden they know what's going on. They are the person who knows what's going on and can do something about it. Gives them a sense of power, and to some degrees a sense of intellectual certainty, a kind of a lack of cognitive dissonance that people strive for. They want to know what's going on in the world, but the reality is that the world is a very messy place. They want to try to make it a safer place. And there's a variety of other things that researchers have looked into. But again, the correlations are generally not incredibly useful when you come to talk to people.
Very good. You mentioned percentages, and this leads me right into Martin's question. Do we have percentages of people who got out? I'm not sure. Has anyone been able to measure that?
Yeah, this isn't actually, it's probably be a good area for research, but no, it's not something that they generally ask in these questionnaires. Did you used to believe in a conspiracy theory? So it would be great to actually do that. Anecdotally, of course, I hear from lots of people, but what percentage is that of the general population is hard to say, and something I would like to know.
Lore has a question, and I honestly think that you've answered this, but because this came up a little early, but just to drive it home to make sure that I even heard you correctly, Lore said the biggest problem I come across is not that conspiracy theorists lack information, it's the lack or trust of any official sources are reliable. They believe scientists, government, and the media are actively lying and working against them. They don't hear anything anyone says if it doesn't agree with their beliefs. Show them data, they say it's wrong. And how do you get past that? And if I heard you correctly, and I'll absolutely let you answer it, but so that I know I heard you correctly, we're skipping a step. We're going to step 2, supplying useful information, where you skipped number 1, maintaining effective communication, because they're not even ready to hear you yet. Am I understanding? Did I get it correct? Or?
Yeah, no, that's certainly part of it. Is that if you start throwing things at them from these sources, they're not going to trust them. But they probably wouldn't trust them eventually anyway. Something you need to do there is something I talked about, which is supplying them with useful context in the step 2, essentially. And people don't trust scientists, but what you can do is try to show them how science works. You can show them how does the science scientific grant making process work? How does an actual scientist work? Lots of scientists themselves are very, very open to being questioned about what they do. So you can actually quite often email a scientist and ask them about, well, what they're doing. I mean, not all of them will like it, but some of them do. Some of them do. Like there's a geoengineering scientist, David Keith, who people often accuse as being behind the chemtrail thing, and he's happy to talk to you. He's been and actually talked to chemtrail groups and discussed their concerns with them, and it's been really helpful. So
I love it.
they don't trust like these official statements and whatnot, but if you can get them to try to understand how science works, not just the old hypothesis experiment observation
Right.
Type of stuff, but the actual people, the scientists themselves, where they go on a daily basis, what they do in a lab, how they get their money, and how the results get published, things like that, and
Well,
the fact that they are just real people.
that goes to your statement of people not really knowing how the sausage is made. They have
Yeah,
these broad, not specific ideas, but I definitely like the idea of email a scientist or ask a scientist, and then they will tell you honestly what they do, unless you're dating them, and then maybe not so much. But when it comes to the science, absolutely. We are just a little bit over the hour, so I want to stop here and Mick, say thank you very much for sharing this information and your book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole. And some of you folks here have said that they are reading it and they are finding it helpful, and then hearing it reinforced from you that this is not something that happens overnight. I think we've come to think that, oh, I just tell you once and everything's fine, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not. We're playing the long game here. So, Mick, thank you so much. And I will remind everyone in the audience that if you missed anything, the recording of this event will be available tomorrow at skepticalinquirer.org, and that the next guest in our series will be here on Thursday, May 13th. Nina Burley will be talking about vaccinations, the CDC, and the hijacking of America's response to the pandemic. And again, a big thank you to you, Mick, and thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, our producer, Mark, and especially to you, the audience. My name is Leanne Lord, and thank you for spending your evening with us. Good night. Good night, Mick.
Good night. Thank you.